For 8 years, the boy touched his ear while his father, a mafia boss who ruled Chicago's underworld, spent millions flying across the world, threatening every specialist to look again. They all said the same thing: nothing we can do. Then a maid who had nothing left to lose noticed something no one else did, and what she found inside that child's ear will leave you speechless. Dominic Moretti. That name made all of Chicago tremble. People called him the Silent King, a king who never had to raise his voice. One nod, one look, one small motion of the hand, and it was enough to decide anyone's fate. At 36, Dominic held the entire underworld of the Windy City in his grasp. Gambling, loan sharking, protection rackets, transport, everything flowed through him like rivers pouring into the sea. Other crews barely dared to breathe when his name came up. The police took their monthly envelopes. Politicians lowered their heads when he walked into a room. Dominic Moretti was not only wealthy, he was dangerous in a way money could not buy, a kind of power born from blood and fear. The Moretti estate sat on 50 acres in Lake Forest, the richest suburb in Illinois. From a distance, it looked like a dream. Georgian-style columns rose high, windows glittered under the sun. Flower beds were trimmed to perfection down to every centimeter. A marble fountain stood in the center of the grounds, ringed by ancient oak trees that had lived through 3 generations. Anyone who looked at it would think it was paradise. But inside, the mansion was another world. Silence. Not the gentle silence of a happy home. This was a heavy, thick silence, as if something had died and no one had buried it yet. 20 bodyguards patrolled the property, guns tucked beneath their suit jackets, eyes sweeping every blind corner. They moved like shadows, not talking, not laughing, never looking at anyone for too long, especially not into their boss's eyes. The house staff were even more careful. They learned quickly that Dominic Moretti liked quiet. No music ever played in this mansion. No television. No laughter bouncing off the walls. Only the soft hush of footsteps over marble floors, the steady tick of a clock in a long, endless corridor, and now and then, the sound of a man's sigh as he sat alone in the dark. The servants moved like ghosts. They came, they worked, they vanished. No one asked questions. No one grew curious. No one dared. Because everyone knew the story about the young woman last year, the one who tried to strike up a conversation with the boss's son. She disappeared after 3 days. No one knew where she went. No one dared to ask. And so they learned to lower their heads, learned to stay silent, learned to become invisible in the very house they served. Dominic wanted it that way. He built this empire on fear, and he kept it alive with fear, too. But there was one thing no one knew. Behind closed doors, the most powerful king in Chicago was drowning. If this story already has you hooked, smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Now, let's get back to that night in Chicago. Every night, when the mansion sank into darkness and the staff had retreated to their rooms, Dominic Moretti sat alone in his study. It was a vast room with bookshelves that climbed to the ceiling, a heavy oak desk, and a fireplace that was rarely lit. But he was not there to work. He was there to look at her. On the wall across from him hung an oil portrait in a gilded wooden frame. Isabella, his wife, the woman with hair black as silk and eyes the warm brown of honey in sunlight. In the painting, she was smiling, the smile Dominic had loved from the very first glance, the smile he would never again see in real life. Isabella had been gone for 8 years, leaving on the very night Marco was born. Dominic still remembered every second of that night as if it had happened yesterday. He remembered her moans in the delivery room. He remembered the sharp stench of antiseptic. He remembered the cold white lights spilling over his wife's pallid face. Everything had been going well. The doctor said it was a normal delivery. The nurse said the baby was healthy. Then the blood began to spill, and it would not stop. Dominic stood there, gripping Isabella's hand, watching the doctors rush back and forth. He heard shouting, the shrill blare of machines, someone calling for more help. But he could do nothing. He, the man who could make an entire city kneel, stood helpless as his wife slipped from his grasp. Isabella looked at him. Those brown eyes that had once burned like a flame were dimming now, fading fast. Her lips moved. She was trying to say something. Dominic bent down, pressing his ear close to her mouth, straining to hear. But no sound came out. Only her mouth shaping silent words. Only her weak breath brushing his skin. Only her eyes begging him to understand what she could not speak aloud. Then the light in her eyes went out completely. Her hand fell, and Dominic Moretti, the notorious mafia boss, cried like a child. 8 years had passed. 8 years he had lived with that image every night. Isabella's lips moving, soundless, wordless, exactly like his son now. Marco lived in silence too. The boy had things he wanted to say but could not bring them out. The boy looked at him with the same pleading eyes, asking to be understood. And every time Dominic looked at his child, he saw Isabella. He saw her death. He saw the pain he could not undo. He saw his own guilt. Dominic had asked himself 1,000 times, what if he had chosen a different hospital? What if he had hired better doctors? What if he had taken Isabella in sooner? What if? What if? What if? Those what-ifs haunted him like ghosts that never left. He blamed himself for Isabella's death, and he blamed himself for Marco's silence. Maybe it was punishment. Maybe God was punishing him for the crimes he had committed. Maybe he did not deserve to hear his son call him dad. But no matter how much he tore at himself, Dominic could not accept it. He could not watch his son grow up in a world without sound. He could not let Marco live an entire life without knowing the song of birds in the morning, the patter of rain on the roof, or the sound of someone saying, "I love you, son." Dominic Moretti had lost his wife. He could not lose his child as well, so he did the only thing he knew how to do. He spent money, millions of dollars. Dominic began the war when Marco was 6 months old, and the moment the doctors confirmed the baby showed no response to sound, he swore he would find a cure at any cost, and he kept that vow for 8 years. Johns Hopkins was the first destination, the leading hospital in America, where the brightest minds in medicine gathered, and Dominic hired a private jet, took Marco to Baltimore, booked the most expensive suite in the hotel, and demanded to see the head of the ear, nose, and throat department immediately. They ran every test, CT scans, MRI, hearing assessments, neurological checks, and 2 weeks later, a gray-haired doctor looked at Dominic with pity in his eyes and said, "Congenital deafness, Mr. Moretti. It cannot be reversed." Dominic refused to accept it. He flew to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, and the results were the same. He took Marco to Switzerland, to a private clinic people whispered about, a place rumored to perform miracles, a clinic that charged $50,000 for a single consultation, and Dominic paid without blinking. But the answer did not change. Congenital, irreversible. "We are very sorry." Tokyo became the next hope. Dominic had heard of a retired Japanese professor, a man who had once performed surgeries no one else dared attempt, so he endured a 14-hour flight, waited 3 days outside the old professor's home, and finally was allowed in. The professor examined Marco for 4 hours, then slowly shook his head. "I cannot help this boy. Please accept it. Accept it." The words struck Dominic like a blade to the chest every time he heard them. How could he accept that his son would never hear? How could he accept that Marco would grow up inside a world sealed in silence, when he was Dominic Moretti and he did not accept anything? So he turned to the real force he had always trusted: power. When a specialist in Boston refused to see Marco because the schedule was full, Dominic sent 2 men to persuade him, and the next day the specialist canceled every appointment to give the boy all his time. When a hospital in Los Angeles said they did not have enough equipment, Dominic bought the equipment for them, an entire system worth $2 million, shipped from Germany within 72 hours. When a famous surgeon in Vienna refused to leave Austria, Dominic had him kidnapped. The doctor was brought to Chicago on a private plane, examined Marco in a room built to look like a real operating theater, then was released with $1 million in cash and a warning never to mention any of it. None of it mattered. Every doctor, every specialist, every medical genius that money and power could reach, all of them said the same thing: congenital deafness, no cure. You need to accept the truth. Dominic had spent more than $10 million in 8 years. He had flown around the world 17 times. He had threatened, bribed, even kidnapped the best in their fields, and still nothing could change the truth. He could order a killing without blinking. He could make an entire city kneel. He could buy the police, buy politicians, buy even justice itself. But he could not buy sound for his son. That was the limit of power, the wall money could not break. And every night, when Dominic sat in his study and stared at Isabella's portrait, he felt himself failing his wife, failing his child, failing the man he believed he was. Then, on a bitter cold morning in October, a woman appeared at the gates of the estate, a woman whose hands would do what his millions could not. October in Chicago was cold to the bone. The sky was a dull gray, like a lead blanket smothering the city, not a single thread of sunlight able to break through. Wind rolled in off Lake Michigan in hard bursts, carrying dampness and the scent of rain that had not yet fallen. Elena Carter stood before the 3-meter-tall iron gates of the Moretti estate, both hands clenched tight around the strap of a worn old handbag, trying to steady a breath that was growing faster and faster. She had been standing there for 10 minutes now, and still she had not dared to press the bell. In the pocket of her thin coat, she had exactly $47. That was all she had left in this life. $47 was not enough to pay this month's rent, not enough to buy her mother's medicine, not enough to do anything except stretch out a few more days of slow, exhausted survival. Elena looked down at her shoes. The soles were worn flat. The toe had a small tear she had tried to patch with glue. The coat she wore came from a second-hand shop, not warm enough for a Chicago winter, but she had no money for a new one. Her hands were shaking, not only from the cold, but from fear. She knew whose house this was. Who in Chicago did not know the name Moretti? People whispered it in dark alleys. They told stories about those who dared to offend him and vanished without a trace. They said working for Dominic Moretti meant either being paid handsomely or never being seen again. Elena had called more than 50 places over the past 3 weeks, restaurants, hotels, shops, offices, and no one would take her. Her record carried a 3-year gap she could not explain without crying. No one wanted to hire a woman with eyes hollowed out by sleeplessness and hands that trembled whenever someone asked about her past. Then she saw the job notice. The Moretti mansion needed a housekeeper. The pay was 3 times the usual, no experience required. Only that you knew how to stay silent and follow the rules. Elena knew it was dangerous work. She knew the rumors about the previous housekeeper who disappeared. She knew she was walking into the tiger's den, but she had no other choice. Her mother, Ruth, was lying in a nursing home with terminal stage cancer. For 3 months, Elena had not been able to pay the fees. They had sent warning letters. If there was no money within 2 weeks, they would move Ruth to a public facility, the place people called the waiting room for death. Elena could not let that happen. Ruth had raised her. She had stood by her through the darkest days. She deserved to leave this world with dignity, not in a cold room with strangers who could not even be bothered to remember her name. So Elena stood there, at the gate of a mafia boss, with $47 in her pocket and a broken heart in her chest. She lifted her eyes to the mansion beyond the gate. It was as beautiful as a palace from a fairy tale. White columns rising high, a roof of vivid red tile, windows glittering under the weak light of a gloomy day. Green grounds stretched wide, a fountain sitting silent in the middle of the courtyard. But Elena did not feel it was beautiful. Something radiated from that house that made her shiver. It looked like a palace, yet it felt as cold as a tomb, as if inside those walls something had been dead for a long time and no one had bothered to bury it. Elena drew in a deep breath. This was her last chance, her only chance, and she could not afford to fail. Her trembling finger touched the doorbell. 3 years ago, Elena Carter had had everything: a husband, a daughter, a life, and then one night, it was all stolen away. 3 years ago, that night, the rain came down in sheets, heavy drops lashing the car windows, while the wipers squealed without pause. Elena sat in the back seat, holding Lily tight against her chest. The little girl was only 3, wearing the pink floral dress she loved most, her hair tied into 2 small, pretty puffs on either side. Lily was dozing, her head resting on her mother's breast, her breathing steady and warm. Elena kissed the top of her daughter's head, breathing in the sweet scent of children's shampoo. It was the last peaceful moment of her life. Kyle was behind the wheel, his eyes bloodshot, his breath thick with whiskey. He had been drinking through the entire party, even after Elena begged him to stop. "I can drive. Let me drive, Kyle," Elena had said. But Kyle brushed her off, the way he always did. That male pride, that was what he called it. Never backing down, never admitting he was wrong, never letting his wife do anything that might make him look weak. "I can drive. Sit still," he slurred, his hands still clamped on the steering wheel. Elena wanted to argue, to snatch the keys, to call a taxi, but she was afraid. She knew what would happen if she made Kyle angry. The bruises on her arm still had not healed from last time, so she stayed quiet. She held Lily close and prayed. The car tore through the rain. Kyle drove fast, too fast, 70 miles an hour on a slick road. Elena watched the speedometer, her heart hammering out of control. "Kyle, slow down, please." "Shut up," he shouted. Up ahead, the traffic light turned red, and Elena saw it clearly, a bright red glow smeared by the rain. "Kyle, it's red. Stop." But Kyle did not stop. Maybe he did not see it. Maybe he saw it and did not care. Maybe his brain, soaked in alcohol, could not react in time. The car ran the red light, and then Elena saw it. An 18-wheeler barreling in from the right, headlights blinding, horn screaming. She only had time to crush Lily to her chest and use her whole body as a shield, and then the world exploded. Metal slammed with a sound that split the air. Glass burst into shards. The car spun, tipped, flipped, rolled over and over. She did not know how many times. Elena felt herself shoved, slammed, thrown around like a rag doll in a washing machine. She did not know which way was up or down. She only knew she was holding Lily, holding her so tightly it felt like the bones in her arms might break. Then everything stopped. Silence. Only the hard patter of rain and the sound of blood dripping somewhere. Elena did not know how long she had been unconscious. Maybe seconds, maybe minutes. When she opened her eyes, the world reeled. She lay in the wreckage of the car, broken glass cutting her skin, blood running wet down her face. But she felt no pain. She felt nothing at all, because Lily was still in her arms, motionless. "Lily, sweetheart." Elena shook her. No response. She shook her harder. "Lily, wake up. Wake up, baby." Lily opened her eyes, only a little. The clear blue eyes Elena loved with every breath were looking at her. But something was wrong. The light in them was fading. "Mommy." Lily's voice was weak, barely a whisper. "It hurts." Hurt. Her baby said she hurt. Elena wanted to scream, to call an ambulance, to do anything, anything to save her child. But she could not move. She could only hold Lily, cry, and watch the light in her daughter's eyes slowly go out. "No, no, no. Stay with Mommy. Lily, look at me. Look at me, baby." But Lily did not look anymore. Her eyes closed. The tiny hand that had been clutching her mother's shirt went slack, and Elena felt her soul shatter into a million pieces. She did not know how long she screamed. She did not know when the ambulance arrived. She only remembered that they had to pry Lily out of her arms, and she fought them like a wounded animal. She remembered Kyle standing by the road without a scratch, without a drop of blood, looking at her with empty eyes, not even sober yet. He killed her daughter and nothing happened to him. That night, Elena did not only lose her child, she lost herself. In the weeks after Lily's funeral, Elena was no longer herself. She lay motionless in bed all day, eyes fixed on the ceiling but seeing nothing at all. She did not eat. Food had turned tasteless, like chewing sand in her mouth. She did not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lily's face again. Those blue eyes fading, those small lips whispering, "Mommy, it hurts." She would jolt awake to the sound of her own screaming, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding as if it might burst. Her body grew gaunt. Her hair fell out in clumps. She did not bathe, did not change her clothes, did not leave her room. Lily's room remained exactly as it had been the day her little girl was taken. Stuffed bears lined up neatly on the bed, the pink dress hanging in the closet, the tiny shoes set beside the door. Elena would go in there and sit for hours, holding a pillow that still carried the faint scent of her daughter, and cry until there were no tears left. The doctor called it severe depression. Kyle called it weakness. He did not grieve. He did not regret. He did not even visit his daughter's grave a single time after the funeral. Instead, he drank more, and he blamed her. "If you hadn't distracted me," Kyle said, his words thick with alcohol, his eyes bloodshot with rage. "If you hadn't kept nagging, I would have seen the red light. It's your fault. All of it is your fault." The first time he said it, Elena said nothing. She was too exhausted to react. The second time, she tried to explain. "You were drunk. You drove drunk." Kyle's answer was a slap, hard enough to knock her to the floor, her ears ringing, her cheek burning. "Don't you blame me," he roared. "You killed my kid. You hear me? You killed her." After that, the beatings became regular. Whenever Kyle got drunk, he came for Elena. Punches, kicks, slaps, hair pulled, her head slammed into the wall. He poured all his guilt into his wife's body, as if hitting her enough times would make him feel less like a murderer. Elena did not fight back. She did not even feel pain. The part of her that could feel pain had died with Lily. She simply lay there, enduring, and quietly wished she could die too, just to be done with it. 6 months after the funeral, Elena filed for divorce. She could not endure any more, not because of the blows, but because every time she looked at Kyle, she saw that night again. She saw him behind the wheel. She saw him run the red light. She saw him standing by the road without a scratch while her daughter died in her arms. Kyle did not protest. He signed the divorce papers the way someone signs a routine bill, but he took everything. The house, the car, the bank account. His lawyer was better, more expensive, and Elena did not have the strength to fight. She walked out of the courthouse with one suitcase of clothes and a few $100s. No home, no car, no job, because she had quit working when Lily died. No friends because she had isolated herself for 6 months. She moved back in with her mother, Ruth, in a small apartment in the suburbs, and then fate struck again. Ruth was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, metastatic, inoperable, only time could be stretched. The doctor said she had, at most, 1 year. Elena collapsed completely. She had lost her daughter, lost her husband, lost her home, lost everything. And now she was about to lose the only woman left in the world who still loved her. Ruth had to go into a nursing home because Elena could not care for her on her own. The fees were $3,000 a month. Elena took every kind of work she could, waitressing, washing dishes, cleaning. But it was not enough. It was never enough. Bills piled up. 1 month late, 2 months late, 3 months late. They sent warning letters. If Elena did not pay within 2 weeks, Ruth would be moved to a state facility, a place where the elderly were packed in like objects, where no one bothered to learn your name, where people went to wait for death, not to live. Elena could not let that happen. Ruth had raised her when her parents died. She was the only one who held her when Lily was gone. She deserved to leave this world with dignity. So Elena took this job, not because she wanted to, but because she had no other choice. The iron gates swung open slowly after Elena pressed the bell, and she stepped onto the stone-paved drive that led toward the mansion, her heart hammering against her ribs. Each footfall felt as heavy as 1,000 pounds. She could feel eyes on her from everywhere, from darkened windows, from neatly trimmed hedges, from security cameras mounted high above. By the time she reached the front door, the massive oak entrance was already standing open. A woman was waiting for her, Mrs. Constance Webb, 58 years old, silver hair pinned up in a tight, immaculate bun with not a strand out of place, a back straight as a ruler, dressed in black from head to toe, not a wrinkle anywhere. But what made Elena's skin prickle was Mrs. Webb's face, cold as stone, not a flicker of expression, as if she had forgotten how to smile decades ago. And her eyes, God, those eyes, gray as steel, sharp as a blade, sweeping Elena from head to foot in a single instant, measuring, dissecting, judging. Elena felt stripped bare under that stare. You are Elena Carter. It was not a question. It was a statement. Mrs. Webb's voice was dry and icy, without a trace of feeling. Yes, ma'am, Elena said, forcing her voice to hold steady. Follow me. Mrs. Webb turned and walked away without waiting. Elena hurried after her. They passed through a grand foyer with a soaring ceiling and a crystal chandelier that glittered above them. Beautiful, lavish, and yet so cold it made the bones ache. Mrs. Webb stopped in the middle of a hallway and turned to face Elena. Before you begin working, there are a few rules you need to remember, she said, her tone flat, like someone reading a sentence. Rule 1. You clean. You keep quiet. You do not look Mr. Moretti in the eye. Ever. Elena nodded. Rule 2. You do not speak to his son. Never. Not a word. Not a gesture. You pretend the boy does not exist. Do you understand? Elena hesitated for a heartbeat. A son. She had not known the Mafia boss had a child, but she nodded. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Webb stepped closer, her voice dropping into a threatening whisper. The last girl who worked here tried to be friendly with the boy. She thought she could help. She thought she was special. Mrs. Webb paused, those gray eyes fixed on Elena's face. She disappeared after 3 days. No one knows where she went. Elena's throat went dry and bitter. She swallowed with difficulty. I understand, ma'am. Good. Mrs. Webb nodded once. You will stay in the servants' quarters in the basement. You start at 5 in the morning. You finish at 9 at night. You get 30 minutes for lunch and 30 minutes for dinner. Your pay is at the end of the month. Any questions? Elena shook her head. She did not dare ask anything. Good. Follow me. They went deeper into the mansion. Elena tried to memorize the way, but the hallways kept unfolding like a maze. She noticed men in black suits standing at every corner. Bodyguards, guns bulging under their jackets, their eyes tracking her like hawks watching prey. No one spoke. No one smiled. No one even nodded hello. They simply stood there, silent and menacing. Elena also saw other servants. They moved like shadows, heads bowed low, footsteps soundless. When they saw Mrs. Webb, they slipped aside and pressed themselves to the wall, eyes fixed on the floor. No one greeted anyone. No one chatted. The mansion held dozens of people, yet it was as silent as a grave. Elena felt herself struggling for air. She was beginning to understand why the pay was so high. It was not payment for the work. It was payment for silence, payment for fear, payment for becoming invisible in the very house she served. Mrs. Webb led Elena down a long corridor lined with oil portraits, stern-faced men, women with sorrow in their eyes. The Moretti family across generations, Elena guessed. They turned into another hallway, and Elena caught a glimpse of the main staircase, white marble steps, ornate wrought iron railing, a red carpet flowing from top to bottom, and on that staircase there was a small, slight figure. Elena stopped. Her heart seemed to miss a beat, and then she saw the boy. Marco Moretti sat alone on a marble step, small and solitary in the vast space of the mansion, 8 years old. His hair was black as ebony, exactly like his father's, but his eyes were different, warm brown eyes, like honey, the same as the woman in the portrait Elena had glimpsed while passing down the hall. His mother, she guessed, a woman who was no longer here. He wore a white dress shirt and black slacks, neat as a miniature adult, yet his face was still boyish, cheeks still round, lips still pink. In front of Marco were dozens of toy cars. He was lining them up, carefully, inch by inch, making sure each car sat the same distance from the next, making sure every wheel was perfectly straight. His movements were slow, precise, as if this were the most important work in the world. No one sat beside him. No servant, no bodyguard, no father. The boy sat there alone, on the staircase, in the middle of all that luxury, as if he were invisible, as if he did not exist. Elena saw it immediately, the way people walked past without looking at him, the way servants angled their paths away to avoid him, the way the guards looked straight through him as if he were air. No one greeted him. No one smiled at him. No one even acknowledged that he was there. This 8-year-old child, the son of the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago, was lonelier than anyone Elena had ever seen. Then he did something that caught Elena's attention. His right hand lifted, touched his right ear, just a light touch, but when his finger met his ear, his face tightened. Pain, unmistakable pain. He lowered his hand and went back to lining up the cars. A few seconds later his hand rose again, touched his ear again, his face pinched again, over and over, like a habit. No, not a habit. Elena knew the difference. A habit did not carve that kind of pain into a face. This was a reflex, the reflex of someone trying to soothe an ache he did not know how to stop. Lily had been like that too. The memory surged up so fast it stole Elena's breath. Lily, at 2 years old, with an ear infection, constantly rubbing her ear and crying, "Mommy, it hurts," she had said, tears sliding down her cheeks. Elena had carried her to the doctor right away, antibiotics, pain medicine, and 3 days later Lily was better. But Marco, did no one take him to a doctor? A billionaire's son and no one noticed he was hurting? Elena looked closer. The boy's brown eyes were not really on the cars in front of him. He was staring into empty space, his gaze distant, hollow, lonely. Elena recognized it at once. The look of someone who had grown used to being left behind. The look of someone who no longer waited for anyone to come. The look of someone who had learned to endure pain alone. That look was exactly like Lily. Exactly like the blue eyes from Elena's dreams. Lonely, hurting, invisible to the world. Elena's heart clenched as if an unseen hand had closed around it. She wanted to run to the boy, to pull him into her arms, to tell him someone saw him, someone cared. But she was not allowed. Mrs. Webb had made it clear. Do not speak to Mr. Moretti's son. Never. Not a word. Not a gesture. The last girl who did had disappeared. Miss Carter. Mrs. Webb's voice cut through Elena's thoughts, cold as winter wind. What are you staring at? Follow me. Elena, startled, dropped her gaze, and moved after the housekeeper, but she could not stop herself from looking back one more time. Marco was still there, still alone, still rubbing his ear and wincing, still lonely in a house full of people and empty of love. Elena told herself to turn away, to mind her own work. She had come here to earn money, to save her mother, not to care about the mafia boss's son. This was not her business. This was not her child. But her heart whispered something else. Pay attention. Watch. Something is not right. The first days at the Moretti mansion passed in silence. Elena woke at 4:30 in the morning, before the sun even showed its face, put on the simple black uniform Mrs. Webb had issued her, tied her hair back neatly, and began work at exactly 5 as required. Mopping the floors came first every day. The mansion's marble stretched across hundreds of square meters, and it had to be polished so perfectly It could serve as a mirror. Elena knelt, dipped her rag into the bucket, and wiped one tile at a time. Her knees ached, her back sagged with exhaustion, but she did not stop. She was not allowed to stop. After that came the rooms, 15 guest bedrooms, even though there were never any guests. She changed sheets, vacuumed carpets, wiped window glass, arranged objects according to the exact positions that had been marked. Everything had to be flawless. Everything had to be in its place, and if a pillow sat 2 centimeters off, Mrs. Webb noticed and made her start over from the beginning. Then there was laundry, hanging, ironing, folding, helping the cook, washing dishes, wiping down the kitchen, tending the garden, work that never ended. Elena worked 16 hours a day, and when she finally returned to the small basement room, she was so drained she could only collapse onto the bed before slipping into a dreamless sleep. She kept her head bowed as Mrs. Webb instructed, not looking at anyone, not speaking to anyone, not existing. She became a shadow, gliding through corridors, working in silence, disappearing before anyone could even register she had been there. But no matter how hard she tried, her eyes kept searching for Marco. Every morning, after she finished the main hall, Elena passed the sunroom, the glass-walled room at the southeast corner of the mansion, and every morning she saw the boy there. Marco sat on the floor alone in the faint light of dawn, unfinished model airplanes in front of him, half-assembled puzzles, picture books no one had ever read to him, and he did everything by himself, building airplanes by himself, fitting puzzle pieces by himself, sitting by himself, silent, always silent. No one came near him. Elena understood that after a few days of watching, the servants took detours to avoid the sunroom. The guards stood watch in the hallway but never stepped inside. Even Mrs. Webb, who controlled everything in this mansion, rarely appeared near the boy. They were afraid of him, not because he was dangerous, but because of his silence, as if it could spread. One night, while Elena was washing dishes in the kitchen, she heard 2 other servants whispering. "The boy is cursed," the first one said, voice trembling. "His mother died giving birth to him. She took his hearing down into the grave. I heard Mr. Moretti spent millions trying to cure him." The second replied, "But nobody could do it. It isn't illness, it's a curse, retribution for what he's done." They fell quiet when they realized Elena was looking, and she quickly lowered her head, kept washing, pretending she had heard nothing, but the words kept echoing in her mind. Cursed, retribution, curse, absurd. Elena did not believe in superstitions like that. She had lost her daughter, lost her husband, lost everything, and she knew tragedy did not need a curse in order to happen. Tragedy happened because life was cruel. Marco was not cursed. Marco was only a lonely child. Elena saw that every day. She saw the way he sat by the sunroom window, a small hand pressed to the cold glass, eyes tracking the cars on the road, the birds in the sky, the clouds drifting past, watching the world move beyond the pain, unable to join it, trapped in silence, trapped in loneliness, trapped inside this lavish mansion that felt like winter, and she saw the way he touched his ear. Every day, many times, his right hand lifting to his right ear, his face tightening, then dropping again, over and over. No one else noticed. The servants kept their distance. The guards did not care. His father never appeared in the sunroom. But Elena saw. She saw the way he pressed his hand to the glass, following a world that moved without him, and she saw what everyone else had missed. A week passed, then 2 weeks. Elena kept working like a machine, mopping floors, making beds, doing laundry, head bowed and mouth shut tight, but her mind would not settle. Every time she walked past the sunroom, she stopped for a few seconds, pretending to wipe the glass, while her eyes stayed locked on the boy inside. Marco touched his right ear. Elena counted it, 17 times in 1 hour. 17 times his hand rose, brushed the rim of his ear, then dropped again, and 17 times his face tightened as if someone were pricking needles into his skin. This was not a habit. Elena was sure of it. A habit did not cause pain. A habit did not make an 8-year-old grit his teeth and endure. This was a symptom of something no one cared enough to investigate. Memories of Lily crashed over her like floodwater. At 2 years old, when she had a middle ear infection, she had done the same thing, rubbing her ear again and again, wincing, crying without even knowing why she was crying. Elena remembered how panic had seized her when she saw her little girl tugging at her ear and screaming. She had taken Lily to the doctor that very night, and they found an infection. Antibiotics, ear drops, And a week later, Lily was fine. But what about Marco? The boy was a billionaire's son. He had been taken to the best hospitals in the world. The best doctors had examined him. Millions of dollars had been spent. So why did no one see what Elena, a housekeeper with no degree, could see after only 2 weeks of watching? One afternoon, while she was cleaning the outside of the sunroom windows, Elena had a chance to look more closely. Marco sat near the glass that day, less than a meter from her, separated only by the clear pane. He was bent over a puzzle, and his right ear was turned toward Elena. She stared, her heart skittering out of rhythm, and she saw it. Something was in his ear, dark-colored, lodged deep in the canal. Not a shadow, not dirt. Something real. Elena held her breath. She tried to see better, tilting her head, narrowing her eyes. The dark mass did not move. It sat inside the boy's ear as if it had been there a long time. Maybe it was wax built up over years. Maybe it was a foreign object. Maybe it was anything. But it should not have been there. And if it was blocking the canal, if it was causing pain, if it was the reason Marco could not hear, then why had no one removed it? Why had dozens of doctors, hundreds of tests, millions of dollars, failed to notice? Elena stepped back, her mind spinning. Who was she to think she had seen something the world's top specialists had missed? She was only a housekeeper. No medical training, no diagnostic experience. What did she have except her eyes and the instincts of a mother who had lost her child? Maybe she was wrong. Maybe it was only a shadow. Maybe the doctors had examined him thoroughly and confirmed there was nothing wrong with the outer ear. Maybe Marco's condition really was congenital, truly incurable, just as they said. Elena told herself to forget it. This was not her business. She was here to earn money, to pay for her mother's care, to survive one day at a time. She was not allowed to care about the boss's son. She was not allowed to have opinions. She was not allowed to exist beyond being a shadow that mopped floors and made beds. Mrs. Webb had warned her clearly. The last girl who tried to be friendly disappeared. No one knew where she went. Elena did not want to be the next girl. She had a mother waiting in a nursing home. She could not die. She was not allowed to die. So she lowered her head, kept wiping the glass, and walked away. But Lily's image would not leave her mind. The blue eyes from last night's dream, looking at her with accusation. "You didn't save me, Mommy. You let me die." Elena had woken up in tears. She had not saved Lily. She had held her child in her arms and watched her slip away, helpless. That pain would follow her for the rest of her life. And now there was another child hurting right in front of her, a child she might be able to help, but she was not allowed. She had to stay silent. She had to be invisible. She had to pretend she saw nothing. Elena bit her lip until she tasted blood. She hated herself for this cowardice, but she had no choice. Until one afternoon, she made her first mistake. She broke the rule. That afternoon, Elena was wiping down the hallway near the sunroom when she heard a sound. Not a voice. Marco could not speak. It was the sound of something dropping to the floor, plastic striking marble, again and again. She stopped, tilted her head, and looked through the doorway. Marco was sitting in the middle of the floor, and in front of him was a half-finished model airplane. He was trying to attach the wing to the body, but his small fingers were not nimble enough. The wing piece kept slipping, falling to the floor, and he would pick it up and try again. The first time, the second time, the third. With every failure, his face tightened a little more, lips pressed hard, brows drawn together, shoulders trembling as he tried to hold himself in. On the fourth time, the wing fell again, and Marco punched the floor, not hard, but full of anger, full of helplessness, full of despair. An 8-year-old boy sat there alone, unable to finish a simple model plane, and no one was there to help him. No one cared. Elena felt her heart clamp tight. She should walk away. She knew that. Mrs. Webb had warned her. Do not speak to Mr. Moretti's son. Never. The last girl who did had disappeared. Elena did not want to disappear. She had a mother waiting. She turned to leave, but her feet would not obey. They stayed rooted to the floor as if glued there. And then, before she could think, they carried her into the sunroom. Elena did not know what she was doing. Her body moved on instinct, on the pull of her heart, not the commands of her mind. She went to Marco, knelt on the icy floor, and gently picked up the wing piece. Marco startled and looked up. His brown eyes widened, surprised, frightened, and with a flicker of fear. He was not used to anyone coming close. He was not used to anyone seeing him. For 8 years, he had learned how to become invisible, and now suddenly someone was kneeling right in front of him. Elena said nothing. She knew he could not hear. Instead, She held the wing, slowly slid it into the correct place on the plane's body, and pressed lightly. The piece clicked into place with a small snap. Perfect. She set the airplane down in front of Marco, then lifted her eyes to his face. The boy was staring at her. No fear now. Only astonishment. Only curiosity. Only something Elena could not name. Something that made her heart soften and ache all at once. She raised both hands and began to sign. Sign language. She had learned it 3 years earlier, when Lily was still alive. Lily had been only 3, but Elena wanted to teach her so many things. She had read somewhere that children who learned sign language developed language better, so she and Lily had learned together. Every night, mother and daughter sat on the bed, practicing simple signs: mother, child, love, hungry, sleep. Lily's favorite was butterfly, because it looked like 2 wings fluttering. After Lily died, Elena thought she would forget it all, but she had not. Those signs still lived in her memory like scars that never healed. I am Elena, she signed slowly. What is your name? Marco's mouth fell open. He stared at Elena's hands as if she had just performed magic. Then he looked up at her face, and in his warm brown eyes something shimmered she had never seen there before. Hope. He lifted his hands and signed back. Marco, how do you know sign language? Elena smiled, but the smile hurt. My daughter was learning, she signed, then stopped. Was learning, not had learned. Because Lily would never have the chance to finish. Tears rose, uncontrollable. Elena did not want to cry in front of the boy. She did not want to explain. She did not want to tear open the wound she had tried to bury for 3 years. She stood up too quickly, turned away, and hurried out of the sunroom. She did not look back. She did not dare, because if she saw those brown eyes one more time, she would not be able to leave. It should have ended there. Elena should have stayed away from Marco after that, kept her distance, followed the rules, and forgotten this moment of weakness. But Marco did not let her go. The next day, while Elena was mopping the first-floor hallway, she felt someone watching her. She lifted her head and saw Marco standing at the corner, half his body hidden behind a column, those brown eyes tracking every movement she made. When their gazes met, the boy did not run the way Elena expected. He stayed where he was and lifted his hand to sign a single word. Hello. Elena swallowed. She should have ignored him. She should have lowered her head and kept working. But those brown eyes looked at her with such aching hunger she could not turn away. She raised her hand and signed back. Hello, Marco. A smile bloomed on the boy's lips, small, but bright as sunlight after rain. From that point on, Marco began to seek Elena out every day. He learned her schedule, learned where she would be and when. 6 in the morning, when she cleaned the main hall, he sat on the staircase and watched. 9 in the morning, when she tidied the living room, he stood outside the door. 2 in the afternoon, when she did laundry in the basement, he slipped down and sat on the steps. He never came too close. He did not interrupt. He was simply there, quiet, as if Elena's presence was the only comfort left in his silent world. Elena knew she should send him away, should tell him they were not allowed to speak. But every time she looked into those brown eyes, she thought of Lily, and she could not. They began to communicate in secret, brief conversations in sign language, when no one was watching, when Mrs. Webb was on the other side of the mansion, when the guards were changing shifts. Elena would pass by, pause for a few seconds, sign a question. Marco would answer. Then she would move on as if nothing had happened. At first it was only simple things. Are you okay? Have you eaten breakfast? What are you building today? But slowly, their conversations grew deeper. One evening, while Elena was cleaning the sunroom after her shift, Marco slipped in and sat down beside her. He signed slowly, as if weighing every word. My father never looks at me. Elena stopped, looked at him. Why do you say that? Every time he walks past, Marco signed, his eyes dropping to the floor. He looks away, as if I do not exist, as if seeing me hurts him. Elena felt her heart tighten. She wanted to tell Marco he was wrong, that his father loved him, that sometimes adults showed love in different ways. But she had watched Dominic Moretti pass the sunroom dozens of times without ever turning his head. She could not lie to this boy. The servants are afraid of me, Marco continued. They think I am cursed. I see them talking. They look at me like I am a monster. You are not a monster, Elena signed quickly. You are only a child. And the doctors? Marco signed, bitterness in his face. They only see money. They come, they examine me, they talk to my father, they take the money and leave. No one truly looks at me. No one asks if I am in pain. No one cares. He lifted his eyes to Elena. Only you. You are the first person who has seen me. Elena felt tears rising. She did not know what to say, did not know what to do. She only knew she reached out, took Marco's small hand, and squeezed gently. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Marco signed again. Your daughter? You said she was learning to sign. Where is she? Elena closed her eyes. The question cut through her like a knife. She had not spoken about Lily to anyone for 3 years, not to her mother, not to a therapist, not even to herself. But Marco was looking at her with clear eyes, no judgment, no pity, only the desire to understand. And Elena realized that this boy, this child the world had abandoned, was the only person she could open her heart to. She is gone, Elena signed, her hands trembling. 3 years ago. A car accident. She was only 3. Marco did not sign anything back. He only looked at her, then suddenly stood, stepped forward, and wrapped his arms around Elena. His small arms looped around her neck, squeezing with all the strength an 8-year-old could give. Elena broke open. She cried. For the first time in 3 years, she cried for real, without holding back, without hiding. She cried for Lily. She cried for Marco. She cried for 2 lonely souls who had found each other inside this cold mansion. When Elena finally lifted her head, she saw Marco smiling. A wide, shining smile that lit up the darkened room. The first smile in months, maybe years. And they did not know that someone was watching, someone who had not seen his son smile in years. That night, Dominic Moretti could not sleep. He lay in bed, eyes on the ceiling, his mind turning over numbers, deals, enemies that needed to be handled. The work of a mafia boss never ended. There was always someone who wanted to take his territory, always someone who wanted him dead. But tonight it was not the work that kept him awake. It was Isabella. He had just dreamed of her. She stood in the flower garden wearing the white dress he loved, black hair lifting in the wind, and she was smiling. That smile was so beautiful, it hurt. Then he woke and remembered she was not here anymore. 8 years, and the pain was still as raw as the first day. Dominic sat up, pulled on a robe, and left his room. He needed to walk, needed to quiet his mind. The mansion was silent at midnight. Only the echo of his footsteps on the marble and the steady tick of a clock somewhere in the dark. Guards at the corners bowed as he passed, but he barely noticed. He walked out of habit, with no destination. Then he heard a sound. Not loud, just a soft rustle, like paper folding, coming from the sunroom at the end of the corridor. Who was in there at this hour? Dominic moved closer, stopped outside the door, and looked through the crack, and he went utterly still. Elena, the new housekeeper, was sitting on the floor with Marco. Between them was a stack of colored paper and a few finished paper cranes. She was teaching Marco origami. Her hands moved slowly, folding each crease with patient care so Marco could follow. Then she handed him a sheet, and he began to imitate her. He did it wrong. The paper crumpled in his hands, but instead of growing angry the way he usually did, Marco looked up at Elena, and she smiled. She took another sheet, placed it in his hands, and started again from the beginning. No hurry, no judgment, only endless patience. Then Marco got it right. He lifted the paper crane, crooked and ugly, but still a crane. And he smiled. Dominic felt as if someone had just driven a fist into his chest. That smile. God, that smile. The curve of the mouth, the squint of the eyes, the whole face lighting up. Isabella. So much like Isabella that Dominic had to brace himself against the wall to keep from collapsing. 8 years. For 8 years he had avoided looking at his son because every time he looked at Marco, he saw Isabella. He saw her death. He saw his own guilt, and he could not bear it, so he turned away. He let others care for Marco. He spent money to chase doctors and cures. He did everything he could, except the one thing that mattered most. He was not there for his child, and now a stranger, a housekeeper, was doing what he could not. She was making his son smile. Boss. Vince's voice came from behind him, low and careful. Dominic did not turn around. He knew the head of security had been standing there for a while. She's breaking the rules, Vince said. Mrs. Webb forbids contact with the young master. Want me to throw her out, boss? Dominic stayed silent. Inside the sunroom, Elena was signing something to Marco. The boy nodded, signed back, and they both laughed. She knew sign language. No one in this mansion knew sign language except the teacher Dominic had hired, the one Marco hated because he was cold and impatient. But with Elena, Marco was smiling. He was communicating. He was living instead of merely existing. "Boss?" Vince asked again. Dominic drew a slow breath. "No," he said, his voice deep and certain. "Let her stay." Vince said nothing. He only nodded and slipped back into the shadows. Dominic stood there a little longer, watching his son through the crack in the door. For the first time in 8 years, he looked at Marco for a long time without turning away, without hiding. His boy was not a monster, not a curse. He was only a lonely child who needed love, and Dominic had not given him that. Dominic turned and walked away, his chest heavy. He did not know that Elena was not only connecting with Marco, she was investigating too. The question about Marco's right ear would not leave Elena's mind. Every day she watched the boy touch that ear and wince, and every day the suspicion inside her grew heavier. Why had no one seen it? Why had the best doctors in the world, with the most modern equipment, failed to notice what she, a housekeeper, could see with the naked eye? She needed an answer, and the answer was in Marco's medical file. The chance came on an evening when Dominic was away meeting business partners. Elena knew he would be gone for at least 4 hours. Mrs. Webb had gone to her room after dinner. The guards changed shifts at 9, and for 15 minutes of handover the surveillance would be looser than usual. Elena waited for that exact moment. She slipped out of her basement room and moved through the dark corridors, her heart pounding hard against her ribs. Every step could be her last. If she was caught, she knew that, but she could not stop. Dominic's study was on the 2nd floor at the end of the West Hall. The heavy oak door was not locked. Dominic did not need locks in his own house. Who would dare enter without permission? Elena pushed the door, slid inside, and closed it behind her. The room lay in darkness, only moonlight leaking through the window, painting faint bands of light across the floor. She did not dare turn on a lamp. Instead, she took out the small flashlight she had hidden in her pocket, clicked it on, and began to search. The desk, the filing cabinet, the bookshelves. She went carefully, trying not to disturb anything. Then she found it. The bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, packed with thick folders, the medical records of Marco Moretti. Elena pulled them out, set them on the floor, and started reading by the narrow beam of her flashlight. There were dozens of reports, from Johns Hopkins, from Mayo Clinic, from a hospital in Switzerland, from a clinic in Tokyo, each one dozens of pages long, dense with medical terms Elena did not understand, but she understood the numbers. Treatment costs at Johns Hopkins, $200,000, Mayo Clinic, $150,000, Switzerland, $300,000, Tokyo, $200,000, and more beyond that, adding up to more than $10 million over 8 years, all to hear the same conclusion: congenital deafness, incurable. She turned page after page, hunting for something that did not fit, and then she saw what was strange. Every report listed hearing tests, CT scans, and otoscopy results, but they all concluded the same fatal error: congenital atresia, or bony osteoma. The doctors had looked, but they had been deceived. They saw the hard, pale blockage, and mistook it for a deformed skull bone sealing the canal, a condition too dangerous to operate on. They had looked, but they had interpreted it wrong. No one had truly looked inside. Elena flipped faster, searching with a kind of panic. There had to be an otoscopic report somewhere. These were the best hospitals in the world. They could not have overlooked something so basic. But it was not there. Not in any file. Not on any page. She thought of what she had seen with her own eyes. Marco always touched his right ear. Not the left. The right. And there had been something dark inside that ear. Something she had glimpsed through the sunroom glass. If the doctors only tested hearing and never looked inside, they would never see it. They would only see that Marco did not respond to sound and decide he was congenitally deaf. But what if something was blocking his ear canal? What if that something was the cause? Elena's pulse ran wild. She was not a doctor. She had no degree. She was only a housekeeper with a mother's instinct, but that instinct was screaming that something was wrong, terribly wrong. She needed to look into Marco's ear, to look closely, up close, directly, to confirm what she suspected. If she was right, she could save the boy. If she was wrong, she was a fool who had dared to think she knew better than the greatest specialists in the world. And if she was discovered, she would die. Elena put the files back exactly where they had been, switched off the flashlight, and slipped out of the room. She had made her decision. She would check Marco's ear herself. What she was about to do could save the boy's life, or end her own. The chance came 2 days later, when Dominic Moretti left the estate to attend an important meeting with other gangs in Detroit, and Vince and most of the bodyguards went with him. The meeting expected to last 2 days, maybe longer if negotiations did not go smoothly, and the mansion felt emptier than it had ever been. And Elena knew this was when she had to act. She spent that whole day preparing, taking a small pair of tweezers from the first aid kit in the laundry room and soaking it in alcohol for hours to sterilize it, checking her flashlight, replacing the batteries, making sure the beam was strong enough, finding a clean towel and a bottle of saline solution in the medicine cabinet, not knowing whether she would need them, only wanting to be ready for anything. All day her hands shook, not from fear for herself, but from fear of hurting Marco. Because she was not a doctor, she had no medical experience, and if she made a mistake, she could cause permanent injury to the boy. Yet if she did nothing, Marco would keep living in silence for the rest of his life, while there might be a simple answer no one had bothered to look for. 10 at night came, and the mansion sank into darkness and quiet. Mrs. Webb long since retired to her room, the remaining guards patrolling outside, the other servants asleep, and Elena slipped out of the basement and followed the familiar corridors, avoiding the camera zones she had memorized after weeks of watching. Marco's bedroom was on the 2nd floor, in the east wing, and Elena stopped at his door, drew in a deep breath, then knocked 3 soft times, their private signal. The door opened, and Marco stood there in pajamas, brown eyes wide with surprise at the sight of her. Not asleep yet, maybe waiting for something even if he did not know what. Elena stepped inside, closed the door, and knelt to his eye level, lifting her hands to sign slowly so he could read every word in the dim glow of the nightlight. "Trust me. Let me look in your ear." Marco tilted his head, confused. "Your ear." "Right ear," Elena signed. "I need to look inside. Will you trust me?" He did not ask why, did not demand an explanation. He only looked at her with those clear eyes and nodded, trusting her completely, without condition, as if she were the only person in the world he could trust. And Elena felt the weight of that trust settle on her shoulders like stone, because she could not afford to fail. She guided Marco to the window, where the moonlight spilled in, bright enough to help her see, told him to sit in a chair and tilt his head to the left, so his right ear faced upward, and the boy obeyed without resistance. Elena took out the flashlight, switched it on, and slowly directed the light into Marco's ear canal. She looked in, and her heart seemed to stop. It was there. The thing she had suspected, the thing she had glimpsed through the sunroom glass. She looked in, and at first, she saw what the doctors had seen. A pale, hard wall blocking the canal, looking exactly like bone. But Elena looked closer, tilting the light. There, at the very edge where the blockage met the skin, she saw a tiny hairline crack, a separation. If it were bone, it would be seamless. But this was separate. It wasn't a deformity. It was a massive buildup that had calcified over years until it looked like stone. The experts saw a wall. Elena saw a door that could be opened. They had only run expensive tests, collected hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees, and declared the boy congenitally deaf, without truly searching for the real cause. Elena switched off the flashlight and sank down onto the floor, her thoughts spinning. She had been right. Her instinct had been right. But what now? She could remove it. She had sterilized tweezers. She had steady hands at least when she forced herself to focus. She could try. But what if she did it wrong? What if she pierced Marco's eardrum? What if she caused an infection? What if she made everything worse? And what if Dominic found out? What would he think a housekeeper was doing, sneaking into his son's room in the middle of the night with tweezers in her hand, digging into the boy's ear? He would kill her. No explanation. No proof. He would kill her and bury her where no one would ever find her. Marco was watching her now, worried, and he signed, "Are you okay? What did you see?" Elena had a choice: to leave and keep herself safe, or to gamble everything for a boy who was not her child. Elena closed her eyes, and Lily's image rose in her mind, her little girl lying in Elena's arms on the night of that crash, blue eyes dimming by the second, lips whispering, "Mommy, it hurts." And Elena had not saved her. She had held her child and watched her slip away while she could do nothing. A pain that had haunted her for 3 years, hollowing her into a body that moved without a soul, leaving her wanting to follow Lily into death every single day. But now there was another child who needed her. A child looking at her with absolute trust, waiting for her to choose. And Elena opened her eyes and looked at Marco, and she could not save Lily. But maybe she could save this boy. And if she failed, at least she had tried. At least she would not have to live with the regret of having a chance and doing nothing. Not this time. Not again. She would not let fear stop her. and she signed to Marco to lie down on the bed, tilt his head to the left, do not move, and the boy obeyed without the slightest hesitation, and she pulled the nightlight closer, adjusted it so the glow fell straight onto his right ear, then took the sterilized tweezers from her pocket, her hand shaking so hard she almost dropped them, and she drew a deep breath, forcing herself into stillness. And she closed her eyes once more and prayed, "Lord, please guide my hands." And when she opened them, the shaking had stopped. Something warm spread through her chest as if someone had placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her, promising her it would be all right. And Elena bent close, guided the tweezers into Marco's ear canal, slowly, carefully, millimeter by millimeter, and she could see the black obstruction sitting there, larger and closer than it had looked under the flashlight, and she adjusted the angle of the tweezers, trying to slip into the narrow gap between the blockage and the canal wall, and Marco lay perfectly still, not moving, not even daring to breathe too loudly. Because he trusted Elena, he trusted she would not hurt him, and the tip of the tweezers touched the mass, and Elena felt it through her fingers, thick, dense, sticky like wax hardened over years, and she pinched gently, trying to catch an edge, then she pulled, and there was resistance. The obstruction did not budge. It clung to the canal wall as if it had rooted itself there, and Elena bit her lip, fighting panic, repositioned the tweezers, gripped more firmly, and pulled again, still resistance, but this time she felt the slightest shift, only a little, as if the blockage had begun to loosen, and she pulled a third time, a little stronger but still careful not to injure Marco's ear canal, and then it popped free, sudden, without warning, sliding out and sitting in the grip of the tweezers, and Elena withdrew her hand and set the black mass in her palm, bigger than she had imagined, nearly the size of an adult's little fingertip, black and dense, carrying the unpleasant odor of something that had decayed over years. And this thing had been in Marco's ear for 8 years, sealing off every sound, imprisoning him inside silence, and before Elena could do anything else, Marco sat bolt upright, his eyes wide, wider than Elena had ever seen, his mouth falling open, his whole body trembling, and he looked around the room as if he were seeing it for the first time. No, not seeing, hearing, because the clock on the wall was ticking, steady and rhythmic, a sound Marco had never heard in the 8 years of his life, and he pointed at the clock, his mouth shaping an attempt, and then the first word slipped out of his lips, T-tick, his voice hoarse and rough, a voice that had never truly been used, but it was a word, a real word, the first sound Marco Moretti had made in 8 years, and Elena cried, tears pouring like a spring, soaking her face, and she did not try to stop them. She wrapped Marco in her arms, holding him tight as if he were Lily, as if he were the child she had lost, as if he were a miracle she had never dared to dream of. And she whispered into his ear, for the first time using spoken words instead of signs, "You can hear now, baby, you can hear now." And Marco trembled against her, lifted a hand to his throat, feeling the vibration as she spoke, touched his right ear. No pain now, no pressure, no blocked heaviness. And then he opened his mouth and tried to say more. Elena, her name. He was calling her name, the second word he had ever learned. And Elena sobbed harder, holding him tighter. "Yes, baby, Elena, I am here." And Marco lifted his face to hers, brown eyes shining with tears and joy and a million feelings he could not name. And he opened his mouth, forcing himself toward one more word. "I want to hear my father's voice." And then footsteps thundered in the hallway, heavy, urgent, the sound of a door thrown open, the shout of a guard, and Dominic Moretti had come home early. The door to Marco's room slammed open with a violent crash, and Dominic Moretti stood there, his face drained pale under the hallway light, his eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness and the strain that still clung to him after Detroit, because the meeting had ended earlier than expected, and he had driven through the night to come home, to see his son, if only once before he tried to sleep. But what he saw froze his blood in an instant. Elena, the housekeeper, was holding Marco on the bed, and her hand was smeared with blood. Blood on her fingers, in her palm, streaked along her cuff, and his son was in the arms of a strange woman, and there was blood, his son's blood, and Dominic's world collapsed in a single heartbeat until there was nothing left in him but red, nothing left to hear but the roar of his own blood in his ears. 8 years he had protected Marco. 8 years he had built a fortress around that boy. 8 years he had killed anyone who dared threaten his child, and now a snake had slipped all the way into his son's bed. "What did you do?" His roar shook the room as he charged like a maddened animal, both hands seizing Elena, yanking her away from Marco and hurling her to the floor. She fell face down, her head striking the foot of the bed. But he did not stop. He grabbed a fistful of her hair, hauled her upright, and slammed her into the wall with the full force of a man gone feral with fear and rage. Elena's back hit the stone with a sickening thud, and before she could even understand what was happening, Dominic's hand had closed around her throat and lifted her off the ground. She could not breathe. Her lungs burned, her vision buckled. "I will kill you," Dominic hissed through his teeth, his face inches from hers, eyes black as hellfire scorching her. "I will kill you slowly. I will make you beg to die. You touched my son. You made my son bleed." Elena tried to speak, but there was no air to shape words, only desperate, rasping sounds. Her hands clawed at Dominic's arm, trying to pry open the iron grip, but he was too strong. He was Mafia. He had killed with these hands, and he would kill her. And with everything she had left, Elena forced her focus into one last breath and choked out, "Look at your son." But Dominic did not hear, or would not. He tightened his grip, and Elena felt the world dimming. She was about to die. She would die in the hands of this mafia boss, and no one would ever know the truth. Marco would never be able to explain. Dominic would never know she had saved his child. And then a sound tore the night wide open. "No!" A shout, raw and hoarse, like an animal breaking free. It wasn't clear, it wasn't perfect, but it was loud enough to freeze the room. Dominic froze, his whole body locked as if lightning had struck, his hand still at Elena's throat, but the strength was gone, and he turned his head slowly, as if moving through water, and Marco stood by the bed, with tears flooding his face, his hands clenched into small fists. Marco ran to him, grabbing his hand and placing it on his own throat so Dominic could feel the vibration. Da, he stammered, the word clumsy and thick. Then he let go and signed frantically, his hands moving like birds. "She saved me. She took the stone from my ear. I can hear you." Dominic didn't know sign language, but he understood the tears, the pointing, and the undeniable fact that his son was reacting to the sound of his breathing. Dominic raised a hand and touched his son's face as if he had to confirm this was real, tears spilling free. For the first time in 8 years he cried in front of anyone. "You can hear," he repeated like a man unmoored. "My son can hear." But then his eyes went to Elena, curled on the floor, her throat bruised dark, her coughing unstoppable, and he looked down at his own hand, the hand that had nearly killed her, and he saw the blood on her skin, the blood he still did not understand, and fear surged back through him, because he did not understand what was happening and he needed answers. He needed a doctor, he needed someone to explain how his son could suddenly hear after 8 years. "Vince!" he shouted, and the head of security appeared instantly in the doorway. "Take her. Lock her in the security room. No contact with anyone." Then Dominic turned to Marco and lifted the boy into his arms. "And get the car ready. We are taking Marco to the hospital. Right now." And Elena was dragged away by 2 bodyguards, too weak to fight, managing only one last look at Marco before the door swallowed her from sight, and the boy stared back with those brown eyes full of worry, his mouth moving as if he wanted to say something, but she was already gone. And at the hospital the truth was waiting for Dominic, a truth that would shatter everything he thought he knew. Northwestern Memorial Hospital blazed with light in the dead of night when Dominic Moretti walked in with his son in his arms, having called ahead and ordered them to ready the best doctors they had, and when he arrived an entire medical team was already waiting at the emergency entrance. No one daring to ask why the most notorious mafia boss in Chicago had shown up at 2 a.m. with a child. They only knew to obey. Marco was rushed into an ear, nose, and throat clinic room, and the doctors ran every test, from looking into his ear to measuring his hearing, from CT imaging to checking sound reflexes, while Dominic paced the hallway outside like an animal trapped behind bars, waiting for a verdict. An hour later, the chief physician stepped out, his face caught between astonishment and confusion, a thick folder in his hands, and he addressed Mr. Moretti with a voice that trembled slightly under the weight of fear and pressure, saying he had good news, that Marco's hearing tested at 90%, that there was no eardrum damage, no infection, that the ear canal was completely clean, and that whoever had removed the blockage had done an incredible job. Dominic stood as if turned to stone. 90%. His son could hear at 90%. After 8 years of silence, after millions of dollars burned away, after dozens of top specialists had shaken their heads and given up, a housekeeper had done the impossible with nothing but a pair of tweezers. Dominic asked, his voice hoarse, what the blockage had been, and the doctor looked down at the paperwork and said they had analyzed the sample the boy still had, that it was a buildup of earwax, dead skin cells, and other biological debris over many years, hardened into a dense mass that had completely blocked the right ear canal and kept all sound from reaching the eardrum. Then Dominic erupted, demanding to know why no one had found it, why dozens of doctors, hundreds of examinations, and millions of dollars had failed to see that damned thing, and the doctor swallowed hard, visibly frightened, admitting that it was a rare case of keratosis obturans. The mass had hardened and taken on the color of the ear canal, camouflaging itself perfectly as a bony tumor. Most doctors would be afraid to touch it for fear of damaging the brain, the doctor explained. It was an easy mistake to make for an honest doctor, but for a specialist, it should have been obvious. Dominic felt his blood boil, tore the folder from the doctor's hands, and demanded every old medical record for his son, all of them, right now. 15 minutes later, he was seated in a hospital conference room, a stack of files in front of him nearly half a meter high, records from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, Switzerland, Tokyo, and dozens of other places. And he turned page after page, reading report after report, hunting for something he could not yet name, until he found it on page 47. A report from 5 years ago by Dr. Howard Stern, the nation's leading ear, nose, and throat specialist. The man Dominic had paid $500,000 to examine Marco, and there it was in black ink on white paper, a dense obstruction noted in the right ear canal, with a recommendation for immediate removal. Dominic read the line again and again, once, twice, 10 times, not understanding, because Dr. Stern had seen it. 5 years ago he had seen the blockage, he had written it down, he had recommended removing it. So why had no one done anything? Why had no one told Dominic? Why had Marco stayed deaf for 5 more years? Dominic flipped to the next page and found the answer in a small handwritten note scrawled in the corner. The patient flagged for an ongoing treatment protocol with instructions not to resolve it, monthly billing $50,000. Dominic read those words and felt his world crack apart, because they had known, Dr. Stern had known, and maybe others had known too. They had seen a simple problem that could have been solved in minutes, but they had not cured it. They had deliberately not cured it, because the moment Marco was well, Dominic would stop paying, and they had kept his son deaf for 5 years, charging $50,000 a month for meaningless treatments, turning a father's desperation into a gold mine. Dominic's hands began to shake, the paper crumpling in his grip as he squeezed too hard, and he whispered, his voice trembling with the fury rising like a firestorm inside him, that they had kept his son deaf on purpose for money. He stood up, kicked the chair over, and roared for Vince, and the head of security appeared within seconds, and Dominic gave the order with a voice cold as ice to find Dr. Howard Stern and bring him in front of him alive, and Vince nodded and vanished. Dominic stood there, breathing hard, trying to hold back the rage that threatened to drown him, and then another thought struck like lightning. Elena, the housekeeper he had nearly killed, the woman who had seen what dozens of doctors had chosen to ignore, the woman who had done what they refused to do, the woman who had saved his son while they drained him dry. And Dominic had wrapped his hands around her throat. He had nearly killed her, the only person who had told the truth, and he had almost ended her with his own hands. Dominic drove back to the estate at a crazed speed, leaving Marco at the hospital under the doctor's care and under the protection of his security team. Then returning alone, because he needed to see Elena, he needed to look her in the eyes and say words he had never said to anyone in his life. The security room was in the basement of the mansion, a cold concrete box with an iron chair and a weak flickering bulb in the ceiling, and Elena sat there alone in the darkness, her throat bruised with the clear imprint of Dominic's 5 fingers, her lips split and dried with blood, but she was not crying, she was praying. When Dominic opened the door and stepped in, Elena lifted her head, and she was not afraid, not angry, and in those blue eyes there was only one question. Is Marco okay? Dominic stood there looking at the woman he had nearly killed only hours before, locked in a dark room, her throat battered by his hands, and the first thing she asked was whether his son was all right, not herself, not her fate, but Marco. Dominic's knees gave out, and he, the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago, the man who made an entire city tremble, sank to his knees before a housekeeper in a windowless holding room. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I am so sorry." Elena looked at him and said nothing. "The doctors knew," Dominic went on. each word dragged up as if it were tearing his throat. 5 years ago, they saw the blockage in Marco's ear. They wrote it in the record. They recommended removing it. But they didn't. They deliberately didn't. Because every month I paid them $50,000 for meaningless treatments. They turned my son into a cash cow and milked me dry for 5 years. He looked up at Elena, eyes rimmed red. I trusted them. I spent millions on them. I thought they were the best. But you, a housekeeper with no degree, no money, no power, you saw what they chose to ignore. You saved my son while they were bleeding me. He bowed his head. You saw my boy when no one else saw him. You cared when the whole world turned its back. And I nearly killed you for it. Elena stared at the man kneeling in front of her, saw the pain in his eyes, saw remorse ripping him apart from the inside, and saw a father, the way she had once been a mother, trying to protect the only child he had left by any means he could. I had a daughter, Elena said, her voice as light as breath. Lily. She died 3 years ago. A car accident. She died in my arms. Dominic lifted his head, startled. I couldn't save her, Elena continued, tears sliding down her cheeks. I held her and watched her go, and I couldn't do anything. That pain kills me every day. But when I looked at Marco, when I saw him lonely and hurting and invisible to the world, I saw Lily. I saw my daughter's eyes looking at me from that boy's face, and I couldn't walk away. I couldn't stand there and watch another child suffer when I could do something. She wiped her tears and looked straight into Dominic's eyes. I couldn't save my daughter, but I could not abandon Marco. Dominic rose, stepped forward, and did something he had never done with anyone but Isabella. He hugged Elena, a gentle, careful embrace, as if she were the most precious thing he had ever touched. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for saving my son. They returned to the hospital together, and when they entered Marco's room, Elena saw the boy sitting on the bed wearing a pair of large headphones. Eyes squeezed shut, his whole body swaying to a rhythm only he could hear. He was listening to music, for the first time in his life. When Marco opened his eyes and saw Elena, he yanked the headphones off and jumped down from the bed, ran to her, and threw himself into her arms, holding on as if he was afraid she would disappear. Thank you, he said, his voice still rough but clearer than before. Thank you, Elena. Elena held him, crying and smiling at the same time. It's nothing, sweetheart. It's nothing at all. Marco released her and turned to his father, stepped closer, stood in front of Dominic, and placed his hand on Dominic's chest. Dad, he managed to whisper, his brown eyes shining, the word clearer this time. He pressed his ear to Dominic's chest and smiled, signing, boom, 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 fast. Dominic dropped to his knees, pulled his son into his arms, and for the first time in 8 years, he cried without hiding it, crying from joy, crying from regret, crying for all the years lost, all the chances missed, all the moments he should have been beside his child but chose to run from. I love you, he whispered into Marco's ear, saying the words out loud for the first time instead of burying them in silence. I love you so much. Marco held his father tight, and he smiled, the brightest smile the Moretti estate had ever witnessed. Elena stood beside them, watching father and son cling to each other, and she felt something warm spread through her chest. She lifted her head and looked up at the ceiling as if she could see through it into the sky above. You did it, Lily, she whispered, tears falling. I saved that boy. Can you be proud of me? And in that moment, Elena felt as if someone was holding her from behind, a small, warm, familiar embrace, as if Lily were here, smiling, telling her everything would be all right. Sometimes God does not send miracles through luxury hospitals or famous doctors. Sometimes he sends miracles through hands that have been shattered and still choose to heal, through hearts that have been broken and still carry enough love to give away, through ordinary people with extraordinary faith. And that is the lesson this story wants to give all of us, that miracles are not found in money or power. Miracles are found in genuine care, in daring to see what others overlook, in daring to act when everyone else stays silent. And sometimes the person who changes your life is not an expert or a celebrity, but simply an ordinary person with a loving heart. Today's story ends here. Thank you for staying with us until the very last moment. And if this story touched your heart, if you felt moved, inspired, or learned something meaningful, please subscribe to our channel, hit like, and share this video with the people you love. Every subscription, every like, every share is a powerful source of motivation that helps us continue bringing you meaningful stories every day, and we would truly love to hear what you think. What do you think about this story? Have you ever met someone like Elena in your life? Or have you ever been the person who saw what no one else saw, Share with us in the comments below. We read every comment and treasure every message from the bottom of our hearts. And finally, we wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Remember that you can be someone's miracle today. All you have to do is dare to open your heart and care. Goodbye for now, and we will see you again in the next video.